Wednesdays. And of course, you can catch the highlights and the best of Path to Truth on Sundays and Saturdays at 2 p.m. We're getting on now with the business tonight. Ntate Mohale, welcome. And please just tell me immediately what your views are on the budget framework presented by the minister last week. Your fellow business leaders out here have found holes in it, I must say, as usual. But the key thing that I was asking is, why is it that business leaders, commentators, and so on always find dissatisfaction with what is presented? Is it because there is no collaboration or the government is hard of hearing? Your views?
I think in the midst of gloom and despair, this was very refreshing, and we support the gigantic efforts of the new Minister of Finance at the time where we are seeing the beginning of implementation of socio-economic reforms, where for the first time, I think SAA has now been partially privatized, and municipalities can procure electricity from sources other than Eskom. At the time that private businesses and companies can self-procure electricity up to 100 megawatts, but also at the time that Transnet, the backbone of our infrastructure, is now saying on rail they are quite happy for public-private partnerships.
Yeah. What do you make of the view expressed by the BMF president here in studio that the difficulties that government is, conducting itself as an inferior partner? I don't want to make his expression more charitable than as blunt as he has put it. Do you share a view like that? Because that would break down the relationship. If I come to you and you see yourself as superior to me, it means that immediately your ideas are going to be rejected.
So first of all, Uno Bula Andile Nomlala is my president at the Black Management Forum. Ntate Elias Monache is my president at the Black Business Council. I would dare not disagree with them publicly. But this notion of partnership is, can you protect the voice that is not in the room? Partnerships means, can we together accomplish that which on my own will take me inordinately long? It's not transactional, but it ensures that in the short term, we build sustainability whilst we are clamoring for this notion of long-term sustainability, because surely in Africa, sustainability must be much more than the food, energy, water nexus.
All right. Valdine, please come in and help me here. What does business really think? I mean, from a JSE point of view, I'm sure you can tell us quite bluntly without the stock market crashing. Do you really have confidence in the finance ministry and the finance direction that the country is taking after you listened to the speech last week?
So look, there were two ends of the spectrum, but overall the MTBPS contained important positive signals, and a lot of it was coming out into saying they have sound fiscal reforms. There's definitely skepticism and focus into what will be the action items in the Feb 2022 budget. So I think the criticism on this one was maybe it was light on detail, but there were essential building blocks that were put into place in terms of positive moves, long-awaited moves. So, the fact that government's commitment to fiscal consolidation and lowering, and it's showing greater discipline in lowering that long-term spending commitments and the lower debt trajectory is a positive over the medium term. There were also, as Bonang mentioned, lots of reforms that have been introduced to diversify the energy generation, massive long-awaited moves in terms of the spectrum auction, and that would be a huge positive if it gets executed. Lots of commitment to a green transition, and look, there's positives and negatives to that, but there were good building blocks that have been committed to. there is execution risk, and there's a lot of skepticism around the additional spending requirements, whether it's at a SOE or government level. So there is some concern or overhang in that regard. But overall, for a medium-term budget speech, and for this being our finance minister's first budget speech in his role, overall it covered all important elements that the market was waiting to see.
Yeah, the president of the BBC here is saying that there is a lot of vagueness, to put it mildly, around the whole issue of income, grants, that we're creating a dependency society. Is that your feeling?
Yeah, I think maybe to put it into context, there's probably a short-term mechanism or need in what has been addressed, but the biggest overhang is on the long-term sustainability of those financing or grants, or what would be those key catalysts to a proper and sustainable economic recovery. I mean, we're coming out from vulnerable headwinds as a country through the COVID pandemic, and then recovering in terms of what lockdown or even, Eskom load shedding means for our economy, low consumer confidence. So I understand that perspective that was shared. Because it's really a focus around how do we sustainably fund an economic recovery across the segment, whether it's at a social or corporate, public-private sector collaboration, and what that means. So I think it's a long-term question mark around the sustainability of this growth. And you spoke earlier around the growth forecast. I mean, growth is an element that's being looked at and reviewed globally. It's not just South Africa's trajectory, but how do we stand relative to other emerging markets or other even developed markets as they all come out of this. So I think it's about the medium-term sustainability of whatever grants or mechanism comes in support or grants. Yeah.
All right. I want to touch a little later about the big, whether you guys think the big is an important issue and whether you think it was brushed aside by the minister on what that means. George, if you can tell me what the SAUBC thinks about the budget and comment on what I think it was Andile Mlala who called this a pleasers budget. They are trying to please someone, and in this case, the narrative is pleasing big business. Why big business in particular? Is that your view? I mean, is it that bad and pessimistic a picture?
JJ, firstly, thank you for really introducing a key, powerful panel of speakers, Bonang, Mohale, Monache, and Nomlala, which are really my colleagues in the business environment, and thank you for that opportunity. Secondly, JJ, before I make that comment, I also want to pass my condolences to one of our own, Muzi, who has really passed on in the past week. He was the chairman of the SME Chamber, which is fairly a very well-known guy in the struggle of this country, particularly in the transformation of the black business in the ICT sector. So we really want to pass those condolences. Let me just maybe touch on the economics, JJ. I think what is very critical that we have seen on this budget, I mean, it takes us back. It's very worrying that each and every minister that is coming has a certain, sort of an existing book. They use the same book. And what worries me is in a normal business environment or implementation environment, you would have what you call a plan. And from a plan, you would then have a budget in order to execute that particular plan. And then you then realize that the reason why you have to execute a plan is because you want certain results, outcome that you want to achieve. And I think that's very critical. Now, what did you notice in South Africa for a number of few years? The consistent increase of unemployment in this country is a very worrying factor. And it's a very worrying factor because when you see what the ministers announce in the budget, you can tell that it is a budget that is consummated by government without broader consultation and linked to that particular plan. And I think that's really the mismatch. And when the budget comes out, it doesn't want to redress South Africa to become economically advanced. What it does is it's goalkeeping. It's basically dealing with the, with the history. The history says we are impregnated with a huge amount of government guarantees that are sitting with the likes of Eskom and so on, the state-owned enterprises. And I was quite happy that the minister says we're not going to continue to fund the state-owned enterprises on the basis that you want to see them sustainable. Is that practically enough for the state-owned enterprises to be sustainable? No. The answer is no. They would not be sustainable. Therefore, we want a different mechanics of approaching these state-owned enterprises to survive. Secondly, very excited that the biggest portion of the budget is funding the social grants, or it's a social budget. For me, that doesn't make sense. We don't want social budget. We want the economy that grows, that can employ people. Because when you pay for social grants, you are not creating new opportunities. What you are doing is you are maintaining what is worse. And therefore, we want to see a government that is very progressive. And therefore, I think the nature of what Mohale was saying, to say government is not becoming progressive when it comes to discussion on contribution that the business makes. I've raised it many, many times that I'm also very worried about the so-called NEDLAC, because that's supposed to be a platform of discussion and negotiation and agreement in order to make sure that the economy of this country becomes successful or progressive. Let me give you an example. What happens with the Minister of Finance budget speech? It's the after effect. They will present to NEDLAC after the minister has presented the budget. What does that mean? It doesn't matter what contribution you make, because the process has already been completed. And those are some of the things that we need to deal with as we
before we go to a break. Any response? Professor Mohale seems very optimistic. Valdine sounds very, very optimistic, although she's cautioning about implementation, which is the usual story. Lots of policies, no implementation.
I think, JJ, myself, let me first greet my president as well, President Bonang, and the rest of the colleagues that just joined us. I think I was very clear, JJ, that, look, we will do this budget speech, as many of them, midterm, the full one, as many of them as possible. The problem here, and it's of structural nature, is the structural composition of our economy. And the ruling political party at the moment has failed dismally to transform and reconstruct our economy. It's 27 years. You go to other countries like Dubai, they get built in 30 years and they get transformed. So government, and we must make it very clear, government in this play is a referee. Private sector are the players and participants. It's private sector that actually creates and builds the economy. But the referee has to have authority on how and what are the terms so that no one gets to be excluded. And we argue strongly and firmly that we need the government that has authority to implement the BE, has authority to implement as many of the policies.
They do have such an
authority. That's the problem. That's why I said...
What are we going to do about it? Because it's not like it's a new discovery. You guys have been in these many business structures for years, talking to the same ministers. George says they are opening the same book. So why is it that we are stuck as a record on this particular, if you like, perspective? That government doesn't seem to be knowing what it has to do.
That's precisely what I said. The argument says that, firstly, there is no capacity, even from the ministerial level to down to the councillor level. And I like what the ruling party is now doing, trying to bring professionals and qualified people to administer at local government. If you don't know what is the problem, you would not know how to diagnose the problem.
All right.
So we need capacity in the state, a professionalized public service, a professionalized leadership, political leadership, so that the challenges that we face in the transformation agenda are first diagnosed properly, and we then bring people that are able to implement the change we want to see.
After the break, and Bonang, if you can lead us on economic, what are we going to do? I can hear the diagnosis of whatever. What are we going to do to deal with the issue of economic growth sustainably? Right? One or two big things that government should do, that business should do to get out of this. Because at the moment, it sounds very pessimistic that you are basically saying to me, government doesn't know what the hell it is doing, in summary. But we'll talk about that after the break.